A throne speech is on the horizon for Canadians. Will it mean a new direction for the country or a trip to the ballot box? Hello and welcome to the Unpublished Cafe. I'm Ed Hand. The gnashing of teeth was apparent when the Liberals pulled the plug on Parliament, proroguing until September 23rd. Opposition members accused the Grits of ducking the investigation into the Wee scandal. The political posturing is not surprising, but the bottom line for all Canadians is finding a way out of the pandemic and getting the economy back on track. Prime Minister Trudeau has said he will consult with all party leaders, but whether it's an empty gesture is still to be seen. There have been overtures toward a green economy, more childcare spending, national pharmacare program, and guaranteed annual income. The game of chicken comes with the confidence vote. If the opposition parties vote against the speech, then we're headed to the polls. Nelson Wiseman's a professor of political science at the University of Toronto, and he joins us now. And Nelson, when I look at a throne speech like this in the midst of a pandemic, is this one of those key throne speeches when we look back in history?
It's hard to tell,
Yeah.
but I'm skeptical,
Mm-hmm.
just based on former speeches from the throne. I think what's significant about this speech from the throne, and the only reason we're having it is because the House was prorogued, so it was required. But I've just gone back and looked at the 2015 and 2019 speeches from the throne. And so the last one was just 10 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And all kinds of things that are mentioned in there, we didn't get action on them. We were told that cell and wireless services were going to be cheaper. Has that happened? We were told there were going to be moves to introduce pharmacare. Has that happened? Are we a further step ahead on reconciliation, which was also focused on in the 2015 speech from the throne? What I would say about the speech from the throne is it's given by the Governor General. It's full of Governor Generalities. You're not getting the specifics of anything. You're just getting little flags saying, well, we're interested in a green economy. Well, that was said in the last two speeches from the throne. What has actually changed? Things like that. So you've got to get to legislation to actually see the more precise content of what is being proposed and voted on, and of course the budget. So the real reason we're having a speech from the throne is because we've had a prorogation, which incidentally the speech from the throne in 2015 promised we wouldn't be getting for political reasons. And we did get it for political reasons. A speech from the throne usually comes after a government has more or less acted on all the things that it promised in the last speech from the throne. So then you get a prorogation, and the government introduces a fresh legislative agenda. We don't have a fresh, what I'm saying is that the legislative agenda that was proposed last December, most of it hasn't been acted on. So the whole rationale and basis for the prorogation is undermined. The real reason, of course, was the Wee charity scandal and the fact that the opposition parties were hot on the heels of the government.
And you think that's the main reason for prorogation, but what about a new direction that the Liberals seem to say that they need to lay out for Canadians? Because as you say, things have changed since December 2019.
Not only since December 19, they have changed dramatically since the House was prorogued. And I put everything in the context of the pandemic because I think that is the dominant issue health-wise, economically, and politically right now in the country. And we were not in that bad situation a month ago when the House was prorogued. The number of cases in Canada was, I don't know, about hovering around 200 a day. I recall when we were in the 50s in Ontario, and I recall David Williams, the chief doctor in Ontario, talking about getting it below 50. Well, where are we now? I think yesterday we had 11 or 1,200 cases in the country. Premier Ford is talking about future lockdowns. I think the Liberals thought because of the terrific boost that all government leaders got, and we just saw this re-election in New Brunswick, and Doug Ford's numbers way up, and Trudeau's numbers went into the stratosphere because people were anxious and they were looking for leaders for leadership, direction, for authority, and but a lot of that is worn off. And now that we see, hey, maybe the lockdown doesn't seem to have accomplished very much, people are very anxious. We're not going to have an election. I'm 100% convinced of that. The party that was wanting an election, I think, were the Liberals, because they could see things might get worse. Let's go for it now. We don't know how the economy is going to bounce back because a lot of these support programs are expiring. Now, maybe they'll be renewed in the speech from the throne, but can we run another $300 to $400 billion deficit?
It'll be pretty tough. It'll be pretty tough. Now, you're saying 100% there won't be an election. Now, that's with the confidence vote. What about when it comes down to the budget? Because that'd be another possibility for the government to go down.
Yes, and also on what are called opposition days, or what technically is called supply, when you're voting money, happens 3-4 times a year, for the government to keep operating, for the grease to go onto the wheels. And you can have, on those days, the opposition parties can introduce any vote they want, a non-confidence vote, and the government at any point, it could decide that a vote on anything is a confidence matter. The government decides. So I actually think this minority government is going to last into 2022, unless we get a situation where we have, like, the WE scandal really now explodes, because we haven't really gotten to the bottom of the political involvement with WE and the role of the bureaucracy here. And I'm not saying we're going to find things. We may, and I think that was large part of the calculation of the Liberals. They might come out okay, so they'll continue. But if we get into a situation where confidence in the government has plummeted so far, the opposition parties will be compelled by public opinion to pull the plug. We're not there yet.
Nelson Weisman joining us in the Unpublished Cafe, professor of political science at the University of Toronto, as we discuss the upcoming throne speech on September 23rd. Now, obviously, the Conservatives have a new leader in Erin O'Toole. And do you think you don't think we're getting an election, but do you think, or do you see possibly the Conservatives working with another party to bring down the government?
Well, they'd have to get two other parties to come along for the ride. I mean, you mentioned Erin O'Toole and the leader of the Bloc Québécois, Blanchette. Where are they right now? They're in isolation. They're in no position to run an election campaign. I mean, that tells you something right there. What is the primary preoccupation, not just of the country, of the politicians themselves? So, this is just shadow boxing about a potential election. Well, here's another feature of the speech from the throne, if I may. It's given by the Governor General. I think this might be her last speech from the throne. To begin with, we normally don't have these once a year. Under Harper, we've now had two within a few months, and now we're getting the same thing with Trudeau. This is highly, highly unusual. But getting back to Payette, we're going to get a report sometime this autumn about her office and how staff feel they've been treated, or what the situation there is. That might put her in an untenable position, and she may end up resigning. Trudeau's been standing by her. Well, he appointed her, and he didn't use a mechanism, which I thought was a very good mechanism that Stephen Harper had created, which is he had a committee that selected, that nominated, that proposed a number of potential candidates. And compared to the last Governor General we had, who was a constitutional expert, he was the president of Waterloo University, Donald Johnston, we got a selection of an astronaut who's very accomplished, but it was really for public optics. The same had happened when the Liberals had selected people like Michaël Jean and Adrienne Clarkson. they were very accomplished in their fields, but why were they being selected as Governor General? Because the Liberals perceived that these are popular personalities and they wanted to be associated with them. It's the same reason that parties try to get hockey stars to run in elections for them. Not many people knew who Johnston was,
Right.
but he was a very competent and he fit the role perfectly. And those are the kinds of people we should be getting.
Yeah, he was dynamite, that's for sure. Okay, we're talking about this throne speech and a possibility of an election if obviously and you don't think it's going to happen. But are all parties ready for an election if it happens on the 23rd?
I think the party that's the best positioned for it are actually the Liberals. The Bloc Québécois is in a good position as well. The Conservatives and the NDP aren't. The reason the Conservatives aren't is because they had their leadership convention. They don't have their ducks lined up yet in terms of the candidates. We were Ed. We were on a program together a few weeks ago with Mr. McTeague, the former Liberal cabinet MP, I think, from the Oakville area, and he said something that I thought was very illuminating. I mentioned that, and this was at the height of the WE scandal, whether Trudeau was in trouble. And I said, if enough people in the Liberal caucus want to beat up on him, then he's in trouble. And McTeague pointed out, hey, that just can't happen anymore because the selection of the individual candidates is essentially determined in the Premier's office, in the Prime Minister's office, or in the Leader's office. So what has happened is that the Conservatives haven't nominated in all kinds of ridings that they don't hold. Whereas the Liberals here, there's a story out today that a broadcaster for Bell Media, CTV, is now going to run in Toronto Centre. The Liberal, that obviously the Prime Minister is very happy with that kind of selection. So the Conservatives aren't ready because they don't have their team lined up, and that has to be determined. It will be determined largely by the entourage around O'Toole. The NDP's in trouble. The NDP, I think, will hold its own, but its problem is money. I mean, he didn't have enough money to run the last campaign. It's in Hawk. It's building in Ottawa. I think it had a mortgage it to the hilt. Last campaign, Jagmeet Singh had to fly around on commercial aircraft. They couldn't get they didn't have the money to rent a jet. This time, I don't know, he may be taking Uber.
Nelson, always thinking outside the box. I want to thank you. It's going to be very interesting on the 23rd when we get the throne speech.
Okay, thank you.
Nelson Wiseman's a professor of political science at the University of Toronto. One thing that is very clear, despite the lack of details, is the throne speech will come with a lot of spending. Bruce Campbell is an adjunct professor at York University's Faculty of Environmental Studies, and he joins us now. And Bruce, how critical is this throne speech in the midst of a pandemic to the future of Canadians?
Well, I think we're at a historical turning point. I mean, we've got a trifecta, at least of moments coming together. Whether it's the pandemic, we've got a crisis of inequality that's reaching a tipping point, and we've got a climate crisis, and all of those, the direction that's pointed to, we'll see in the throne speech, will at least give us a sense of, whether the government is going to kind of step through onto the other side and make transformative change, or it's going to listen to, as the current Minister of Finance said in her book, the plutocracy. Will the plutocracy, the very wealthy corporations and the richest individuals, will they kind of set the parameters? And what we see is just marginal change.
Now, obviously, in the throne speech, there'll well, there will be spending. It'll come clearer into focus with the budget, but it has to be paid for. And you're calling for a wealth tax. How and why?
Yeah, I mean, I think don't forget the difference between the federal government and the provincial governments and municipal governments and individuals and companies is the federal government, through the Bank of Canada, can create money. And it's that money creation that's been going on that's been financing all of these spending measures. And it can go on doing that for quite a while. I mean, our tax system is gotten way out of balance with major cuts to the very wealthy, both their tax rate and loopholes and tax havens and so forth. So the tax measures named, and I've mentioned the wealth tax among others, is to address the inequality problem, to get back to a situation where we were 4 decades ago, where there was a fair balance, a fair share of national income and wealth that was held by the majority of Canadians. That's gotten way out of whack, and that is what a wealth tax. And not just a wealth tax, could be an estate tax. It could be changing the rates on capital gains, which are taxed very low, and it could be barring, hiding wealth, avoiding income through tax havens.
It's interesting that we talk about this as I was reading this morning. New Jersey is actually, as a state, is bringing in a tax on millionaires right now.
Well, it's good to see. Let's hope they will follow suit in Canada. And the wealth imbalance is much more pronounced in the States. There have been, comparably, but we're doing better, but we're still at historic levels. I mean, we're higher than we were in 1928, just before the market crash, and then 10 years of recession and another 5 years of war. So we need to rebalance the tax system. I mean, and what we're seeing now. During the pandemic, I don't know if you saw the report that was out yesterday, but the top 20 Canadian billionaires have increased their wealth by $37 billion since the middle of March, and so that just can't go on. It will, as I said, it will explode the system, and just like we don't do what's necessary on climate, it will also, it'll be both nationally and as an international community, it will lead to catastrophe.
Bruce Campbell is joining us on the Unpublished Cafe, adjunct professor at York University's Faculty of Environmental Studies, as we discuss the upcoming throne speech. And one item that seems to be getting a lot of traction, or at least a lot of discussion, is guaranteed annual income. Do you think it might become reality?
Yeah, some form. It looks. You're right. There's been a lot of talk about it. And I think, in principle, it makes sense. Other people have been proposing, although this hasn't reached any level of profile in Canada, is a jobs guarantee. I think as you can structure your basic income in different ways, and you can structure it in ways that would not be good. But if, in principle, I'm certainly open to looking at the idea, and I was just thinking that I needed to dig into that question, especially if it's mentioned in the throne speech.
Now, you're also calling for a rebuild on the social safety net. How do you see that helping the economy?
Uh, just imagine. Well, first of all, it would help a lot of people,
Mm.
young or old people. But just to give one example, I mean, if you had uh, a, a public universal childcare system, you've got so many, usually women, that can't go to work because they're at home with kids, and there's no access to childcare. Certainly, affordable childcare in some cases, and if you could create that public childcare system, kind of build on what exists in Quebec, that would have a huge impact for employment and productivity in the Canadian economy.
Spending translates into deficit and debt. At some point, something has to give, right?
That's right. That's right. Um, but what has to, in my view, uh, the the kind of the policy elite, the policy establishment, whether through the Bank of Canada or the Department of Finance, but especially through the Bank of Canada, their focus has been on price stability and inflation. Actually, the problem now is more how do you get out of deflation rather than how do you put the reins on inflation. We are so far from seeing pressure on inflation. The priority should be, and the priority of the Bank of Canada should be, as it was after the war up until the late 70s, employment is the number one priority. But when you get to a stage, unemployment now officially is at 11-12%. I'm not sure of the very latest numbers, but one of my colleague economists, Jim Stanford, has calculated the real rate of unemployment at closer to 30%. So you've got all kinds of room to provide the support and the stimulus without. And you can, I mean, when you're creating, the bank creates money, it can do that indefinitely. Where it becomes a problem is where you reach a full employment level and it starts to push up prices, and then you have to worry about it. But there's also what I talked about earlier, that imbalance in the system, where you've got you've got the wealthiest 1% or the 5% that are not paying their share of taxes. For example, most of their wealth comes not from wages like you and me, but it comes from shareholder value. It comes from stock prices, and we've seen a disconnect between the stock market and the real economy, which accounts for what I just mentioned about the 20 billionaires in Canada really making away like bandits during this pandemic. So yeah, it's there are limits, but they're embedded in the real economy. There's lots of room.
Bruce, I want to thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Bruce Campbell is an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Environmental Sciences at York University. And that leads to our unpublished .vote question. What would you like to see in the throne speech? Guaranteed annual income? National pharmacare program? Increased tax on the wealthy? Or a focus on climate change? You can log on and vote right now at unpublished.vote and have your voice heard. I want to thank Nelson Wiseman, professor of political science at the University of Toronto, and Bruce Campbell, adjunct professor, York University's Faculty of Environmental Studies. And I want to thank you for listening to the Unpublished Cafe. Stay safe. I'm Ed Hand.